One of the strongest validations for focusing on inclusivity is that it drives growth. These are the largest growth segments, and we are doing this in order to maximize those opportunities. We don't want to target one segment and antagonize another one. Bringing all segments together to maximize the overall growth.
At Mechanism, we build iconic brands with soul and science. The soul is culturally relevant brand building, and the science is the always-on marketing activities that drive the bottom line. Learn more at mechanism.com. Our culture drives almost everything we do, including the media we consume, the clothes we wear, and the brands we buy. Today, we're joined by Carlos Santiago, co-founder of AIMM, which stands for the Alliance for Inclusive and Multicultural Marketing. Carlos is a leading researcher and marketing strategist who has spent much of his career focused on growth roadmaps, innovative research, and econometric models to solve the ever-growing challenge of multicultural marketing. Over the past 18 years, he's guided and led several Fortune 100 brands like AT&T, AARP, and Target into crafting diverse and inclusive campaigns that speak to more consumers in a culturally specific way. On today's episode, you'll learn why getting specific about who your campaigns speak to can drive better business results. You'll learn how our culture has shifted and why your target audience needs to know that you're not only understanding them, but also actively engaging with them. And you'll learn to not fear backlash from anyone not willing to celebrate other cultures. The data is clear. The majority of customers support and expect marketing campaigns to reach across the divide. Okay, let's dive in and learn about the soul and science of multicultural marketing with Carlos Santiago. We're excited to have Carlos Santiago on the podcast today. So Carlos, welcome.
Nice to be here, Jason.
Fantastic. And I'd love to start with a little bit of your origin story because you have a very particular set of skills, as they say, and you've worked at various places helping strategize for a lot of Fortune 100 companies. Can you tell me a little bit about how you started your career? Tell me how you got to where you are now.
Thank you for the question. It's interesting because when I graduated with my MBA and started on strategic planning with Anheuser-Busch, and finished like a first year leadership program, first Latino going through it, they realized that, oh, you're Latino. We are seeing a lot of growth from specific breweries in the country that we would like to understand where's all that new demand is coming from. So in analyzing the different breweries and the distribution areas and the demographics, it became really evident that it was multicultural that was driving that new incremental volume in here in Los Angeles and other areas, but primarily here in Los Angeles, and that volume was really going to drive the growth of the company. And that first project got me into multicultural marketing still in the, we're talking, this is early 1990s. From Hispanic, it expanded pretty quickly to Asian, given that California was one of those key markets, and then it kind of like exploded from there. But I fell into it to answer your question.
So you really were going through an Anheuser-Busch kind of marketing leadership program, and they realized, oh, Carlos can maybe help us understand this growing audience. Is that kind of how it started?
Yeah. From answering a strategic question of where's this volume growth coming from, which is really what marketers should be doing today, right? Who's driving the volume should drive every other decision about marketing investments and allocations and allocation, not only a dollar, but efforts.
I mean, the question was, why is this population buying our product? Why is that growing? And then did it turn into how do we engage and market to this audience?
Very much so. The annual strategic planning process of each brand, for the first time, require them to touch on multicultural marketing, because only the king of beers, Budweiser, was allowed to that point, was allowed to have multicultural targeting. And it became clear that it needed to be Budweiser, it needed to be Michelob, it needed to be all brands. And there were specific brands for beers for the African American segment, but again, those efforts were not across the brand portfolio, the larger brand portfolio. So it ended up then being required that all brands needed to have a multicultural strategy, and was there for 5 years, helping the brands understand those insights and those opportunities. And from there, I went to the telecom business that was also in a transitioning, a transformation, being split into the bells and the baby bells taking over my bell. And again, a huge focus on multicultural consumers because they use telecom and all the new products, including the internet, at a higher, much higher level than non-multicultural segments.
My first job was field marketing for Miller Genuine Draft. We had a program called Las Trocas, which was going to on-premise Hispanic sellers, and we'd have models signing autographs, big inflatables. I was out in the field actually, like doing that work. It was my first job, and then I moved to San Francisco. That was in LA. I worked on Pacific Bell, and remember the stadium used to be called Pac Bell Park. It's kind of funny because that was my second job, is doing advertising for Pac Bell.
So that was my second job at Pac Bell as well. So we have that in common.
Yeah, that's crazy. And then from your success at Anheuser-Busch and then working at Pac Bell, did you then go to a consultancy? Did you go agency side?
Yeah, look, the career in telecom was amazing, to open my eyes to a direct data on what consumers are doing, right? Because you own the consumer data and the databases, and we were able for the first one of the first companies in the U.S. to classify each household according to the race of ethnicity, and be able to create a database, a first party database. We didn't know at that time that it was called first party data, but to create that. And it exceeded a million, 3 million customers for Bell Atlantic, NYNEX, that became Bell Atlantic before Verizon. And that gave us an allocation that was a third of all the consumer marketing expenditure, $71 million in the 1990s, to all multicultural segments, including LGBTQ. So really, really forward.
Wow, that was very early on to have that much allocated there. That's incredible.
Yeah, and from there it was like, look, I've done enough mergers, and I'm ready now to do real marketing over many categories. So let me open, after a brief stint with a .com, let me open doors to a consulting group, established in 2000, looking at solving the barriers to entry from as many segments as possible, that is data rich, fact based, and guiding them through their strategic planning.
That's SSG.
That is Santiago Solutions Group. Yes, SSG.
Did you know you had the sort of entrepreneur bug? Did you always feel that? Did you always say, oh, one day I'm going to start something?
I was afraid to start something until I went to the .com business and saw so many startups, and that took every hesitation away. I'm like, I'm so much more prepared.
if these bozos can do this,
Exactly.
then
Pretty much,
yeah,
yeah. And I'm a lot more factual than they were. So I was like, okay,
yeah,
nothing to be afraid here.
that's awesome. And so, how long has SSG been around?
Now we're in our 24th year.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yes, yes. And, through that, obviously the markets have been much more understood. The priorities of focusing in multicultural after the 2000 census were very apparent. And through the 2010s, it was really going up, and the more and more brands were gaining knowledge. During the 2010s, it became almost like that those efforts were priorities, the top three priorities for major companies, that then almost it started kind of like the pendulum going the other way, saying, well, if multicultural are everywhere, and the difference is we should not focus on the nuances, we should focus in the commonalities. And everything got transformed to an approach called the total market approach, where everything ended up being more, again, no nuances, market to the commonalities. And in doing that, the unintended outcome was that it touched everyone, but not everyone, not anyone specifically. It got watered down.
It became too ubiquitous, the marketing.
And especially for those um, segments that still had barriers to entry to different categories and different needs of information or customization, personalization, it kind of whitewashed everything in a common denominator that was not that of the multicultural segments, and gave companies excuses to take shortcuts rather than really understanding the opportunity within each one of the multicultural and inclusive segments. And it became a descending curve of investment in multicultural segments, obviously at a time when they were beginning to provide almost 75 100% of the entire growth of consumer audiences in the US. So something needed to be done to bring back a correct approach to multicultural and inclusive marketing by the year 2015 or so.
I see.
That was a pivotal time.
So it really went from, in the kind of inclusion multicultural marketing segment, it almost went from no inclusion then to starting to have specific multicultural marketing segmentation, then back to almost the same thing of, but all inclusive, if you will, without really breaking out the nuances. And then about 9 years ago, it kind of went back to, okay, we've got to be talking to audiences in different ways. We can't just say it's a total market.
That is exactly what happened. Multicultural was in a comatose bed, and it really needed to be prioritized again. So my colleagues and business partners and associate Gilbert Davila and Lisetta Arsuaga, co-presidents of Davila Multicultural Insights, and I approached the Association of National Advertisers, the ANA, with the idea of creating an arm of the ANA that would refocus marketers on the appropriate ways to tackle the barriers that existed, but doing it right, doing it in a way that it maximize both growth and equity in the marketplace. And we call that the Alliance for Inclusive and Multicultural Marketing. And that's the objective, to achieve business growth and equity in multicultural and inclusive segment.
And is that part of the ANA now?
That is one of the core pillars of the ANA, just like you've also heard of See Her and other specific initiatives of the ANA.
And so that is a like-minded, similar founders in your space. You guys created that together, this alliance.
36 companies, and I would say those are really visionaries and thought leaders that have been in these segments for a long time, including J&J and obviously P&G and PepsiCo, as well as Nielsen and many other core members in that initial group of 36 founders. It has expanded to over 225. And at this point, they're not only that they are that they've already done it and that they're experts. The doors have widened to bring in brands within large companies that have not built that knowledge and are and desire to advance really quick through that journey and earning that right to create new business opportunities with multicultural consumers.
And so AIM can be a resource for those brands that are maybe either behind or, trying to figure it out. They can come to AIM and get insights and kind of a roadmap on how to do that.
Exactly. For new brands and for brands and companies that have been there for a longer time to get to the next level, there are systemic barriers in the industry that need collaboration to bring answers and to, like privacy legislation, that issues with data accuracy and so forth. So we are moving to tackle those industry barriers together.
That's amazing. And what year did you start AIM?
AIM was founded in 2016. This is our 8th year.
And have you seen the SSG? How do you kind of split your energy between those two?
Yeah, you find more energy in order to do both. Well done. Obviously, AIM is from an industry member perspective, but there's a lot of innovation. It's not personalized at a company level, right? If a brand needs specific answers of insights, research, analytics, modeling, risk, understanding risk versus opportunity of going into LGBTQ or whatever, those questions are then consulting that come to SSG, and for industry wide we tackle those issues with the other co-founders, Gilbert Lisette, and the entire AIM team, who is amazing.
That's great. And SSG is 24 years now. Are you going to keep working on SSG for another 10 years? Are you any wind down or passing of the torch in the future?
Well, we have a great team, and they are. We're all convinced that there's a long journey ahead, and there's plenty of needs in the marketplace, and will continue. We also, uh, just to make that competition for energy that you asked about a little bit even more competitive, is that we found that the industry needed solutions that were not in the marketplace, solutions specifically to understanding the impact of culture, relevance, and inclusivity, and how it impacts growth, right? Validation. So there were no measures that understood and gauge the the impact of each advertising spot, each spot, and how it could move the needle. So we created a company called the Cultural Inclusion Accelerator, and underneath that, Gilbert Lisette and I have innovated different measures that answer called the impact of culture in ads, impact of culture in content, the incremental value of DEI in communications, and finally, the incremental value of placing allocations with diverse owned media.
Is that separated from AIM? Is that a different another initiative?
Yeah, that is completely research. It's a research machine. More than 1.5 million evaluations of ads over the last 4 years.
Geez, that's amazing. What do you think, Carlos? What are you really, really good at? What makes Carlos Carlos when it comes to this type of work?
It's a rare combination that I think comes from my my back to my college days. My undergraduate degree was in architecture, and then I did an MBA. So I can create, um, but at the same time, I'm very rigorous with the quantitative skills to be able to create an architectural piece or to create a brand that who's is experienced by an audience. So that right brain and left brain combination that is very well balanced to understand what's important about a piece of data and what to do so that consumers and brands come together.
It's information and action rather than just insights and, you know, let someone figure it out. It's that idea that you can act and find from this insight or data or fact, here's an action to be taken or a way to improve something or what can be done about it. Um, how do you measure if the alliance from its genesis in 2016 to now has been successful? Do you measure it by starting with 36 and now it's 200 something? Do you measure it by volume of impact? Like, how do you determine if you're making the dent you want to make?
Great question, because we just completed a survey looking at the areas, 7 areas that we identified 4 years ago that were systemic barriers impeding the companies from and brands from the full opportunity presented by these segments. And those 7 areas have been quantified directly or indirectly, and we have been keeping a track of how they are advancing. That is one of the barometers that we are using. Those 7 areas. Let me just share them with you. Are building in industry and community partnerships. First, second, eliminating bias in ads and content. Third, increasing multicultural and inclusive marketing investment for growth. Fourth, increasing talent representation in marketing teams in front and behind the camera. Fifth, leveraging ERGs. Sixth, demanding data and measurements accuracy. And seventh, achieving an equitable supply chain.
So that's super helpful. You're trying to measure and see if the industry is moving those goals forward. So you have real clear criteria. How long has that been established, that criteria?
So we established these formally in 2020 during the uh, time after Black Lives Matters, when we really looked at ourselves and said, what do we need to move forward, right? But many of those initiatives had been working from 2016 to 2020. That time gave us the opportunity to coalesce more of the industry leaders and bring them behind us through a process of identifying those barriers and together creating solutions, like we did with the cultural insights impact measure to measure the inherent cultural relevance versus bias of each spot that is being put on air.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, that's great. And do you have any brands that you or companies that you think have done incredibly good job of advancing inclusivity and multicultural marketing?
Yes, Reckitt is one of those. Obviously Procter& and Gamble has been there and continues to pave the way for so many. Mike Pritchard and his entire team is so committed to expanding their knowledge and bringing all consumers to close revenue gaps that he's mentioned would bring more than $1 billion of growth to P&G. This is all about growth.
Yeah.
And doing the right thing socially, but certainly to do the right thing by brands focused on growth. But a company, I think that's why I mentioned Reckitt, that is not as well known. It's an international company, and the U.S. division of hygiene and other products, household products, under Gary Osofshin, the CMO there, has been so focused that in very, very short period of time, talking about 3 years, they have validated the impact to growth, not just for one brand, but about four of their major brands, with a very focused strategy and initiatives that parallel those same 7 areas of the AIM's commitment to creating systemic change.
Oh, that's amazing. So they've sort of adopted those benchmarks or those goals, and then that's how they evaluate themselves.
That's correct.
What about a lot of the pullback from brands that get backlash, particularly in the LGBTQ plus communities? I like the example you gave of P&G, where you can advance an industry and inclusivity, but it also is leading to it's good business because it leads to growth. What about the recent sort of more conservative approach of part of your core audience has a problem with your message and you pull back? What would you say to a brand that talked to your group about that?
Yeah, this is obviously a reflection of larger society in the US and the many points of views that we have. One of the strongest validations for focusing on inclusivity is that it drives growth. These are the largest growth segments in the US, and we are doing this in order to maximize those opportunities. Being inclusive of all segments, we don't want to target one segment and antagonize another one. So bringing all segments together to maximize the overall growth. And there are techniques to be able to do that, and many tools that we have innovated to be able to balance that before we roll out campaigns. And that's one of the key considerations, is to understand that we're going to do this in a way that we bring all segments, whether they are multicultural or Gen Z, or they're boomers and they're white non-Hispanic, center of the country, middle of the country, or more in one of the coasts. It's about bringing all, not about bringing one versus the other. The other consideration is that when companies are confronting potential backlash from some groups that are do not want companies to have DEI efforts, for example, is to understand that the vast majority of Americans agree. More than 80% of all Americans, 90% most of the time, agree that companies should be driven with equality towards their employees and towards consumers.
Yeah.
Only a very small fraction of consumers, only 2% actually, that do not agree with internal and external quality, gender quality, um, sexual orientation quality, etc., etc. When you put those that are not for any kind of equality and don't want to see diversity on camera, on ads, etc., they are a very, very small fraction, right? And it's impossible to make all happy. So not engaging those with those groups and continuing to look forward to the focus on that growth and how to achieve that growth maintains companies moving and progressing on all these 7 areas and maximizing their growth.
So really the loud vocal minority, very small minority, but it seems bigger and louder. The objective there is to ignore them, not bend to them, because they represent such a small purchasing power in the kind of universe of consumers.
Yes, one example, for example, was a study that AIMM released last year, which looked at the risk of not continuing LGBTQ efforts if they were attacked by a small group. And the the potential risk coming from LGBTQ allies and even non allies was greater from companies that would step back, stop their marketing efforts to LGBTQ, their representation and equitable efforts, than from acquiescing to those groups, and what would be the benefit of that. In fact, it's not even close. It was a for every one customer that you would lose from that small minority, you would gain 3 consumers, 2 to 3 consumers.
Right. So it's not even close, but brands really do get a lot of pressure because we live in a quarter to quarter shareholder society of growth. A lot of companies take the short term approach and they're not thinking about playing the long game. When you think about the alliance, and maybe you talked a lot about newer companies, but when a smaller company has much limited resources and limited marketing dollars and they're not a P&G, but they want to focus on that 7 criteria, what advice do you have for them when they maybe can't do all of those things at the same time, or they're not big enough to, or do you think that anyone can do it no matter the size of the company?
I think that everyone can do at least 4 of those.
Okay.
Um, Thinking about data, obviously, facts should be at the base of everything that you do, and understanding what measures and what data out there. If you do a digital company, if you're buying third-party data to target your efforts, understand the nuances of ensuring that that data is accurate, more accurate than some others. And investing in data accuracy is going to bring higher ROI, right? Everyone is interested on that, especially if they're smaller, because they have to stretch their marketing dollars. I would say that a second one and very close one would be investing in diverse owned media, because even though that media doesn't have as broad reach as general market media, it brings a deeper affinity with the segments that it primarily targets. And that affinity gives those that advertise in those platforms an additional boost in terms of the quality of the connection. So it's not about reach, it's about thinking about the quality of the connection with each one of those audiences. So they are very powerful if you are going specifically at Hispanics from a digital, from a CTV point of view, that can be regionalized and get to the right devices. And those are good examples of two things that every marketer should be aware of.
Right. So you can add on things, but there's a base that you need to start with no matter what. What do you see as the future for the Alliance? It seems to be growing and got a lot of initiatives, a lot more companies involved. What do you see the future of it being?
Everyone, every brand should be thinking about this. This census just came with a figure that Hispanics were 73% of the U.S. growth. When you add the other multicultural segments, it's 100% of the growth. LGBTQ is the fastest growing segment among Gen Z. If you add LGBTQ and allies that are Gen Z, they represent 75% of all Gen Z. You cannot do Gen Z without being inclusive of LGBTQ. You cannot do general market in any generational group without also being a multicultural marketer. So the demographics of this country are very clear.
The audience is telling you have to do it. There's no option. Right. Carlos, do you have a mantra or a quote that you live by or that you sort of guide you?
My mantra really is about doing things well by consumers. If we keep them in mind, we'll do the right thing as marketers.
That's great. I love that. All right. For inspiration of the week, I'll say I'll go first, and then I'd love to hear what you have to say. But something that recently came out that really inspired me was an ad from Ford. It was an ad for hands-free driving in the new Ford cars, but they used it while they were talking about the product to have the drivers do sign language of a very famous song, Express Yourself. And it was for the Ford Mustang electric. It was just really a really clever way to show the product, but also using ASL to show the song, and it really played on hands free. But they did it in a really clever way. And I thought that was really inspirational, where you're still doing product advertising and sort of product benefit advertising, but you're doing it in a way that it involved deaf talent. It involved ASL interpreters. I just thought, I don't know, there's something about it that really got me inspired as a brand campaign or piece of work. Anything that's inspired you recently?
A lot of my inspiration is coming from the future of AI and the representation and inclusivity that AI could bring to marketers. They were, I think we see 3, 4 reports every single day about the integration of AI in the creative process. And there was a story about Wells Fargo creating one of the first campaign completely through AI. That really awakened me to the fact that AI takes data, consumer data, identity data that has been not representative in the last 20 years, and that if we don't fix that, AI is going to obviously um, create outcomes, imagery, or decision making that is biased. So
Right.
really need to innovate how to fast forward since it's moving so quickly, how do we address that in order to get marketers the value and the promise of AI, but in a balanced, representative, and equitable way?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, what's a lesson that you want to share with the audience? So I'll go first. Mine is, I know mindfulness is such a overused and loaded word, but I have been trying to recently, before a meeting, put breaks in before meetings because usually my schedule is like pancaked. I run an agency, it's always busy. And putting in like 5 to 10 minutes to prep for a meeting, and not necessarily prepping like studying the material, but prepping for how you want to enter that meeting or how you want to show up more open hearted and more receptive and not distracted and busy and, figuring out what the next thing to do is. That mindful 5 minutes of mindfulness pre meetings have been, and I don't always get it right, but it's been very effective for me to show up in the right way because we often don't think about how we're showing up for our coworkers or clients or whatever. We kind of just go from meeting to meeting. So that's one lesson that I've been working on. I'm working through that lesson. What's one that you've been working on?
Funny because it is also about mindfulness. Balancing the what I call the COVID clinic one after the other when we were giving shots and taking tests. We all remember those days. And when your calendar is like that, one after the other, you forget about the human connection because you're trying to get things through. So bringing that warmth and that human quality to starting with your team and to your who's at the other side of the call, your client, is key. And the best way for me to maintain that mindfulness state is to go on walks really early on, sometimes at 5:30 in the morning, 5:45 when the sun is coming out, and at night when I come back from work and before having dinner. It's my reset ritual.
I love the reset ritual. That's great. All right. And finally, double dog dare the audience. A new tactic or strategy that the audience can try out. This one came from someone on my team, Lily, who is trying this new technique of journaling moments from the weekend, Monday morning before you start the workday. Did you think of an idea over the weekend that you want to incorporate into a project? Or was there a memory from the weekend you don't want to forget? Or what can you take from a learning that you can bring into the work week? And it's Monday morning brainstorms. And it's just really like 10 minutes with a journal recapping your adventures over the weekend, good and bad. And then what from that might you bring into your work week? So I'm going to try doing that. So I double dog dare the audience to try Monday morning brainstorm, solo brainstorms. Do you have a double dog dare you want the audience to try?
In my tips, one of the things that I am now integrating is testing a new AI platform, adding a new platform every week, and then taking, once you have four or five, kind of taking those that are not working off, but doing a lot of exploration more than one time because prompting is an art and a science, and sometimes not enough soul as it should
So
have.
true.
But it is just opening my eyes to so many opportunities and understanding which platforms give answers that are not as generic but much more nuanced. Love the progress, also sharing with my team members of what we have experienced and having lunch breaks that we focus on the latest experience with the different applications.
I love that one platform a week to focus on. I mean, because there's so many now, do you find that, okay, I've experimented and I come back to these two or three that I'm most comfortable with or they give me the best results?
for different application, different use cases, because not one application is good at everything. If you're developing marketing materials and need an AI application, that answer is going to be from someone. I would recommend trying, Jasper. And for writing articles and pieces for perhaps your media, I've discovered that Claude it gives me much more of the nuances of the different segments rather than a chat GPT that gives me a very high overview but doesn't get into the nuances.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your time with us today. I love learning more about Carlos, more about the alliance that you co-founded in the land of AI. I think what stood out to me is more human connection is very important. It's going to be ever more important. So thanks for all your wisdom and being on the Soul and Science podcast today.
Thank you, Jason.
Soul and Science is a Mechanism podcast produced by Maggie Bowles, Ryan Tillotson, and Lily Jablonski. The show is edited by Daniel Ferreira with theme music by Kyle Merritt. And I'm your host, Jason Harris.